do you think that internal audit is there yet? I mean, we're having challenges, in applying the continuous auditing, integrating the technology in the audit procedures. From your observation, do you see that internal audit departments, at least in the USA, are capturing or, reaching, evolving to this level, or we're just talking about the future?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an excellent question. And I think it's a question that a lot of internal audit departments are asking themselves. When you get to some of the fancier, the artificial intelligence, machine learning, they're really just on the very beginning of a curve on that. I would say, and it comes up in surveys by organizations like Protiviti that are asking internal audit, are you using these technologies? For the most part, and there's a whole curve. For artificial intelligence, it's mostly a no right now. I think there's a lot of work to be done on getting data, data governance in place, so that they can have the proper data that would allow something like machine learning or artificial intelligence to work. But they really have come a long way on things like advanced data analytics. And I think that's an earlier step to some of this continuous monitoring and automation of some of these, the internal audit practices. But certainly, most of them are now on their way, on a journey for using data to unlock all kinds of insights throughout the organization that internal audit can bring. And I even hear internal audit's gotten much better at data analytics, that other parts of the organization that could benefit from some analytical work are coming to the internal audit department and saying, show us how to do this. We don't expect you to run, a program, a data analytics program in marketing, for example, but maybe you can show us the way, you can show us how you got started. So there is a lot of work being done there. Robotic process automation, which kind of fits in, putting scripts together to automate some of these areas is definitely coming along, and there's a lot of promise there. There may be a little earlier on the curve for that, but to really answer your question, I think artificial intelligence is a little longer off, but it does hold great promise. I have talked to some of the experts in that area, and they talk about how all the audit reports that come out of the internal audit department end up kind of just sitting there, and they might look at different things each year, and no one person, or humans aren't very good at going back through these reports and finding the gems, or finding some connections between one report or another. Maybe our organization has a problem in one specific thing that we're just not good at, and it shows up in different audit reports. Artificial intelligence can just kind of breeze, very quickly digest all of this information and find some of those connections. And I think we're going to start to see a lot more in that area, but more into the future.
Very interesting. Another question, Joseph, now, in your career, you served as the editor in the Directorship magazine, and how can the governance system empower the internal audit, or in the contrary, make less use of the internal audit and, make it a useless, let's say, function?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it's a good question. I think internal audit has maybe one of the more interesting relationships or connections inside an organization. I would say lines of responsibility, whether internal audit is, what's become best practice, and I think the IIA backs this up, is that internal audit, the chief audit executive has a dotted line responsibility to the board of directors, particularly the audit committee, but then also, more day-to-day responsibility to the CEO, the chief executive officer. And I really do think that that's a good relationship, a good dual reporting structure, where the internal audit just has to do a lot running that department that needs that kind of day-to-day oversight that a CEO can provide. In some organizations, it still reports to, say, the CFO or the chief legal officer, and that really just depends on the structure of the organization. I think some organizations find that works better for them. There's no real one way. I think more recently, we're finding that if they do report to the CEO, there's a little more oversight and a little more responsibility there. But having the ear of the audit committee is really important, because ultimately the board of directors is responsible at the end of the day. They have the ability to remove the CEO if things are really problematic. If we have a thing like an Enron that we've seen, or WorldCom, where we had problems that at the CEO level. So it's a pretty interesting relationship, and I think what's also interesting is to see how that is evolving around the world. Those types of relationships were more common in Europe, and it was only after Sarbanes-Oxley and that round of scandals that we had in the early 2000s that U.S. companies started to look at structures like that more often, and we are starting to see that more commonly in the Far East now. Japan which is a little bit, from what I understand, a little bit further behind the curve on governance structures, in the East and in places like Japan and China. But we're starting to see more internal audit in the Middle East. We're starting to see more of those types of structures as well. So, it's pretty interesting to watch how those how those connections are made at different companies and different organizations around the world.